Welcome to section 5 of web penetration testing with Kali Linux. In this section we're going to talk about securing web applications. The first step and the most important step of any application security is the development security. So when we are developing an application, we need to make sure we understand the risks, we do a proper risk analysis, and put enough controls on the application to keep it secure. There are a lot of different vulnerabilities when we're developing applications, and if we are not aware and we don't understand those vulnerabilities, we could simply expose the application to external threats. We're going to talk about some of these vulnerabilities in this video. So we start with input validation. Input validation is a very simple control, but very important control. So the input validation control is what would protect us in most cases against attacks like SQL injection or cross-site scripting or command execution. So if you remember on DVWA, we've been demonstrating how SQL injection or command execution or cross-site scripting works. I'm just going to go back to my DVWA and demonstrate this to you quickly. So for this particular section of this course, I actually installed a new DVWA server, which is running on a Linux machine, just because I'm going to show you how we can set up some additional security later on. But what it is basically is just a simple Ubuntu machine with the PHP DVWA application running on the top of it. So I'm just going to log into my DVWA machine, and as you can see, once I'm logged in, I can go and check DVWA security. So you see, this is a newer version of DVWA, so you see impossible option in there as well. But I'm gonna set this to low and submit. And if you remember, with the command injection, we could just simply type colon and cat etc passwd, and it would show us the list of commands. So what input control does is it would check to make sure it is actually receiving an IP address here. This is simple thing that we could do as part of the application development. So if I change this back to highest security and I go back there and type, you see it just comes up with an error that says you have entered an invalid IP, and that's how it should be, and that's how we could simply protect the application, because on the back end, on the application development, we are just checking to make sure that we are actually receiving an IP address in this field and nothing else. That's all we need to do. So again, input validation is a very important control. Authentication. Authentication is basically when we need to identify and authenticate a user to get access to what they need to access. I don't think I need to spend too much time explaining why authentication is important, but majority of applications, authentication is a very critical part, and we need to make sure that we have enough controls on the authentication level to make sure users, they can only have authenticated access to what they need. If there is a break or there is a problem in the authentication mechanism, you can imagine non-authorized user could simply get access to, or non-authenticated users could get access to what they needed. Authorization. Authorization is basically where we identify and specify what is actually needed for a particular user to access. So once they have authenticated, we need to specify which parts of the application they are allowed to touch, which part of the database they are allowed to look at and get the reports from, and so on. So if the authorization doesn't work properly after a user is authenticated, they might have access to things that they're not supposed to have. Configuration management. As you can see on the screen, it is very important to make sure we have enough access controls on the system that unauthorized users cannot gain control or get access to what they don't need. For example, administration interface has to be only accessible for authorized users. So that's a fundamental that we need to make sure is designed as part of our web application development. Sensitive data. So we need to be careful with the sensitive data, disclosure and tampering. If we don't have enough controls on the sensitive data, let's say personal data as such, those sensitive data might be exposed to public, or they might be exposed to people that they're not authorized. Session management. Session management is an important part of web application development. When we're doing authentication on the web application, if we don't do proper session management, one session could possibly steal another session. That is a type of attack that some remote attackers use, session hijacking or CSRF and similar attacks, because there is not proper session controls or session management controls in place. Cryptography. Make sure the data is always encrypted. Is data at rest on the storage or on the database, or whether data motion when it's moving between the client and a server, so no one can intercept the traffic. So always use HTTPS and secure communication. Parameter manipulation. Parameter manipulation, we talked about this when we were talking about Burp Suite and demonstrating Burp Suite. So you remember that you could basically manipulate a lot of those parameters. So if we don't think about parameter manipulation and how users can manipulate the parameters to gain control to what they need to, or unauthorized access to what they want to, that could be a concern. So remember we talked about URL parameters are dangerous. So using sensitive parameters on the URL could actually expose us to vulnerabilities. And the last thing is auditing and logging. So we make sure that we log everything and we have auditing in place. Make sure that the logs are being monitored and being sent to our logging solutions or security event management solutions to ensure even if our preventive controls didn't work, at least we can detect the attacks and we can detect the concerns and risks that might be on the application and respond to them appropriately.